Record. Okay, will you please, Dr. Ronald, Dr. Mallett, and Gisella, please grab a seat and. All right. Let's make sure that the sound is good here.
Yes, testing.
All right. Well, first of all, big thanks to both of you. Great job.
Thank you.
Big thanks to you.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. You know, I always feel that it's a good time travel really is at that intersection of really of science fiction, which is really the science of tomorrow. So, I want to start off by asking Gisella, what was the inspiration?
Oh, that's such a big question. I guess obviously I'm a huge sci-fi fan. I grew up watching like a lot of Star Trek with my dad. Calvin and Hobbes had like time travel like comics in it, yeah. And when I was in film school, like my favorite film was La Jetée, which is like this black and white, beautiful featurette. And I think that just kind of got the ball rolling. I just decided, what better way to learn more about a topic than do a documentary on it. And so I got to interview these really interesting people, and it snowballed, and now it's what it is.
And how did you end up meeting Ron?
I reached out to Ron. I don't know if you remember this. I reached out to you once, and I think you were too busy. And then after I did my Kickstarter, I reached out to Ron again, and he was very kind enough to let me interview him. So I went to Connecticut and interviewed Ron.
And what has been the reception throughout? I think this film has been in a couple other festivals.
Yes.
And so, what is the reception that you've had so far after viewing of the documentary?
I think a lot of people have gotten interested in time travel and started thinking a lot more about just the different types of ideas that are out there. I think that the biggest thing that I wanted to get out of this film is, or hope that people would get out of this film, is that there's not just like, I think when you think about time travel, it's very easy to think about, it's science fiction, but it's so much more than that. There's so many different types of avenues, like you saw all these different people and like how their perceptions of time travel is, and I just hope that people could see that.
And Ron, what is you use the coffee analogy?
No, yes, that's right. The twisting of space.
I'm sure the audience would like to hear that again, because I remember the first time I read your book on time travel, which came out in 2007. It took me a little while to really get it right. So if you can please share this again with the audience.
Well, it's a little bit involved, but you remember there was this device that I was showing, a light pattern that you can create by using lasers. You can actually create a loop of light by having a laser going this way, this way, this way, this way. You can actually create a circulating beam of light. And now, what's very, very important is that my work, and I need to stress this very importantly, my work is based on Einstein's theory of gravity, not my theory of gravity. That's very important because the scientific basis of this is really in his theory of gravity. And what I did was to solve. He had a set of equations which describe how gravity is connected with the structure of space. And what I did was to solve those equations to show that a circulating beam of light can cause empty space within that to become twisted. And what Dan was talking about is the analogy that you can think of what's happening is let's suppose you have a cup of coffee in front of you. And think of the coffee as being like empty space. Now, let's say you have a spoon. Think of the spoon as being like the light beam. So take the spoon and stir the coffee. What happens to the coffee? The coffee starts swirling around. That's what the light beam is doing. Okay? The light beam is like the spoon, and the coffee swirling around is like empty space. And so anything that you put, for example, now you would say, well, how do you see it if it's empty space? Well, let's go back to the coffee. Suppose I put a coffee bean into the coffee, and then I start stirring it. What's going to happen? The coffee's going to start dragging the coffee bean around. Now, the thing that's going to be the analogy of the coffee bean is a neutron. suppose I put the neutron into the empty space and I turn on the circulating light beam. The circulating light beam will start twisting the empty space. Now, even though I can't see the space itself, the space will start dragging the neutron around, just like the coffee was dragging the coffee bean around. So that's experimentally how you would see it happening. So literally, what you would have is you would turn on the circulating light beam, and then you would drop a neutron in, and then all of a sudden you would see the neutron start moving around. That would tell you that empty space is actually being dragged around. And so that analogy with stirring a cup of coffee really is an accurate analogy. But as I said, once again, what I've done, the experiment hasn't been done. What I did was I actually solved equations, and I showed that this was possible theoretically. What we have to do is we actually have to do the experiment. Now, that's where the problem comes in, because people don't realize just how expensive real scientific experiments are. You know, a couple of years ago, in 2017, the Nobel Prize was won for the following extreme. This was predicted by Einstein over 100 years ago, by the way. Einstein predicted that suppose you have two black holes crashing into each other. What will happen? Well, according to Einstein, when these two black holes hit each other, it will actually cause ripples of space itself. Not ripples in space, but ripples of space itself. Those ripples of space are called gravity waves. Okay? So his prediction was that the collision of black holes will create waves of gravity, waves, fluctuations of space. Now you might say, how expensive can that be? Well, the real experiment costs $1.1 billion. People are stunned when they hear that because they don't realize just how expensive. So just to do a feasibility study associated with what I'm talking about is going to cost $250,000, which is a drop in the bucket, but that's just to do a feasibility study. So what we're trying to do now is try to get the funding in order to do that. And we'll see what happens. One of the things that we're hoping that might happen is, having documentaries, such as the one that was done by Gisella, bring my work to light so that perhaps eventually some investors might be interested. And another thing that there seems to be some interest in is in Hollywood. Hollywood is interested in the possibility actually of making a feature film, a book that I've written called Time Traveler. It's essentially, the book is about this the father-son story. That's why Hollywood is interested in it. It's the father-son story and how that led me to eventually make the breakthrough in solving Einstein's equations. So there is a real interest in that. And if there's any producers out there in the audience that would like to talk with me, I do have an actual film agent who actually has connections with producers. And if there's any that would like to talk to my agent, contact me after this.
How important was H.G. Wells? I mean, when you read the book earlier on, Time Machine, how important was it? I mean, it really getting you into the career of physics.
Right. Yeah. Well, one of the things you'll notice that was emphasized by everyone there, we had different opinions, but one thing that was uniform was the fact that it's the imagination that stimulates us. And in fact, one of my favorite quotes of Einstein is that imagination is more important than knowledge. Imagination stimulates us and can encircle the world. Now, what he meant was that knowledge isn't not important, but it's our imagination that stimulates us to want to acquire knowledge. Okay, and we don't realize just everything that we're associated with. Even this building was someone's imagination. Okay, so imagination is what leads us to want to acquire knowledge. Sometime in our distant past, someone noticed that whenever there was lightning, sometimes it struck and there was fire happen. Well, how did that happen? Maybe we can do that ourselves, And so that was their imagination trying to imagine how they might be able to do something that was happening in nature. So for me, H.G. Wells' story, and the very statement at the beginning of it where it said that scientific people know very well that time is just a kind of space and we can move forward and backward in time. I was only 10 years old, or 11 when I read that, and that stimulated my imagination. Is that really possible? Is that something that can be done? So it was extremely important for me as a first step. Then the second step was, and this was an important transition, was that even as a child, I tried to do something as a child, putting something together, and it didn't work. But I remember that it said scientific people know. So the next step was how to take my imagination and make it a reality. And that's where science came in. And fortunately for me, and incidentally, the socks that I have here were a gift to me. They're Einstein socks. Shows the importance of Einstein in my life. And that's where that next step came in, was realizing that Einstein said that unlike the physics of Newton, according to Newton, nothing can alter time. But according to Einstein, there are ways that time can be altered. And what I decided to do and make my life study was to do that. And I should mention that my career has actually been in the theory of black holes and cosmology. The Big Bang Theory, that's actually, if you look at my scientific papers, there are dozens and dozens, you would see that my professional scientific papers are in black holes and cosmology. But that was important because it turns out that black holes can affect time, and I knew that I could, by studying that, and that was part of Einstein's theory, that it would help, because black holes were considered to be crazy, but legitimately crazy, as opposed to time travel, which was considered crazy. So by building my career and using black holes as my cover story, that's how I was able to get here where I am right now.
So, in other words, in terms of the building of the time machine, you can only go back to the very beginning of the construction of the actual experiment, the actual setup of the experiment.
Yeah, and that's just what, in a certain sense, it answers the question that's been asked, is how, if time travel to the past is possible, how come we're not inundated with time travelers from the future? And what you have to realize is that to travel, you actually have to use a process, and you have to use a device. And it doesn't matter what type of process you're using, whether it's a black hole or my suggestion of a circulating light beam, it has to start. And so when it starts, that's when time actually starts getting altered. And so if you leave the device on, you can send information back, all the way back to the point the device was on. But before the device was turned on, there's no effect. And so that's a limitation. So that appears to be a real limitation, but it also explains how come we're not being inundated by time travelers, because what it's saying is that the first human-scale time machine just simply hasn't been invented.
And how will the, say I've set up t equals 0 at the beginning, I turn on the machine.
Right.
And how will I know that there is a particle coming from the future?
Well, you have to have an experiment, and the thing is that you can't just have something appear out of nowhere. Remember, I was talking about information being sent by using neutrons.
Right.
Well, you actually have to have a device that's going to detect the neutrons.
Oh, okay.
So when you turn it on, you have to have something that would be a receptor for that. Okay, it's just like having your phone. You have to turn your phone on, and the phone has to be something that's receiving a signal. It's just not, So that's the thing. You actually have to have an appropriate receiver for the experiment that you want to send back, the information that you want to send back and receive.
One of my pet theories has always been the idea of parallel universes and multiple universes. So, and one thing that I asked Ron a few months back is, well, what if someone builds a time machine in a parallel universe, but it was built slightly earlier than the one that's built in this one?
Yeah. Well, the thing is that's an interesting possibility, but the device would have to be similar
right.
to the device that you built. Okay, it can't be just something different. It has to be it would actually have to have been a device that was similar to the device that you built. Okay, right. And then that might be a possibility.
Absolutely. Now, Gisella, so we're moving forward. Where are you taking this documentary next?
So I'm actually focused on distribution right now, more educational distribution. Wanda, who's the redhead in the film, she couldn't be here to the screening today. She's actually teaching a class at UW, University of Washington, called A Brief History of Time Travel, and it's based off of the film, and it's an exploratory class, so you can decide if, after taking the class, if you want to get more into STEM or doing more computer science. So we're taking that. It's a different way of like distribution, but let's see what happens. So yeah, that's what's next.
That's exciting.
Yeah, it's a little different, but cool. Yeah.
Yeah, sounds exciting. So I want to open up the floor to the audience. I'm sure you guys. Oh, okay.
Whoa. Yeah.
Okay.
So I totally followed the coffee bean analogy, but just taking it one step further, it kind of lost me a little bit. I understand neutrons spin up, spin down, creating a binary code.
Right.
And what exactly is happening after that?
Well, the thing is that, and that's important, because once you assign that, okay, and as I said, and I should point out, relevant to the question of this gentleman, a neutron can only spin in one of those two directions. That's important. Quantum mechanically, other things can spin in any direction. Okay, neutrons can only spin up and down. That's important. Okay, so when you try to have a device to choose that, that means that you actually know that you only have chosen one or the other direction. Okay, so but once you've done that, once you have a stream of them, then you would have that detector that would detect those spins, and they would be connected to a computer. And as you know, computers can only read that way. So your computer would literally read a signal or not. Okay, so the thing is that, so that's what you would have to have the detector, the neutron detector would have to be connected to a digital device. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Good question.
Oh, yeah.
For both of you, earlier in the film, there's presented the three different timelines that are possible ways to talk about time travel. There's the dynamic, the fixed, and the kind of many-world theory. I'm wondering which of those three you each subscribe to.
Do you want to go first?
Yep, there you go.
Oh, me? Okay. I would say I like the idea of the many worlds theory. I like the idea of like there's like infinite universes or infinite like parallel universes where I'm playing out different lives. And I do like the idea that maybe there's one universe that time travel is not possible, and we could be in that one. Sorry, Ron.
Cover both ends.
No, the thing is that one of the things that is similar is the fact that the parallel universe theory is actually, I would say, a lot of physicists who do believe in the possibility of time travel to the past like that one. Why? Because of the fact that it resolves the paradox notion. I should mention that this parallel universe notion was not connected with the notion of time travel, was connected with the notion of quantum mechanics. There is a theory that was developed back in 1957 by a man named Hugh Everett III at Princeton. He was a physicist at Princeton. And what he said was, in quantum mechanics, you can only predict what's probably going to happen next. You cannot predict exactly what's going to happen. And what he said is, let's apply this to the whole universe and not to just simply particular systems. And what he found mathematically was that whenever a decision was made, that decision and its alternative both happen, but in a different universe. Let me give you an example. Suppose that this evening you went to a restaurant and you looked at the menu, and you saw item A on the menu and item B on the menu. And let's suppose that you decided on item B. Okay? At that instant, there would be a split of the universe. There would be actually two parallel real universes. The one in which you have chosen item B on the menu, but there now is a real you in another universe who's chosen item A. They don't know about each other. And this is happening for every single one of us separately. So all of these universes are happening, these multiple parallel universes, and they're happening in a thing that's called superspace. They don't know about each other, but they're very, very real, okay? And I always thought that it made it for a great philosophy of life, okay? It would say that no matter what it is that I decide to do, I know in some universe I got it right. The thing is that it also answers, there was a famous baseball player named Yogi Berra, and he actually was famous for what was called yogiisms. He made statements that didn't seem to make any sense. And one of them was that when you come to, and now with quantum mechanics it does make sense, he said, when you come to a fork in the road, take it. Okay? Quantum mechanics, that makes sense. Okay? So, but in any case, this notion of parallel universes was applied because people were worried about this notion of a paradox. You know, suppose you go back and prevent your grandparents from meeting each other. Then if your grandparents don't meet each other, they don't have your parents. And if they don't have your parents don't exist and they don't have you. So how were you able to go back into the past and prevent them from meeting each other? That's the so-called famous grandfather paradox. And the parallel universe theory overcomes that because it says that you can travel back into the past. But as soon as you arrive in the past, there's a split of the universe. You arrive in a parallel universe in which you can prevent your grandparents from meeting each other and not having, but that's okay. You'll just find yourself in a weird universe in which you were never born. But remember, I said there was a split. The other branch, you don't arrive in that in the other branch, your grandparents meet each other, they have your parents, and they have you. So what it says is that time travel to the past is possible, but the past you arrive in is not the past that you came from.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question. Oh, you all the way in the back.
Yeah, so and this question is for both of you. This film has shown like both of you drew a lot of inspiration from like older literature, specifically H.D. Wells. My question is there any pieces of modern literature that have either changed your view on how you think about physics, or have inspired you in a new way? Maybe like Stephen Hawking's like Three-Body Problem, some Michael Crichton, that kind of stuff.
I would say I think a lot of video games are really interesting to me, the way that you can play with time in that perspective. When you're watching like a movie, it's very linear, right? I would say Super Time Force is pretty cool. I don't know if that actually changes, though, my perception of like what I think about time travel is, and I guess maybe that's because I've just been researching it for so long, I think, but I think it's very fascinating. I'm excited to see like what kind of new ways people can play with time in that type of media happen.
Yeah, well, for me, it's refreshing to see that sometimes Hollywood can get it right as far as, the science behind it. And the most recent movie that I can think of that is reinforced and I think was done beautifully was Interstellar. Interstellar really does get the way in which black holes can affect time. And as I said, that's part of one of my research areas. And that's probably not an accident because the technical consultant for that was a man named Kip Thorne. Kip Thorne is the same Kip Thorne who actually got the Nobel Prize in 2017 for verifying the existence of gravity waves. So they actually had him as the technical consultant. So the way in which they talked about how black holes can affect time, which was beautifully done. And incidentally, if you haven't seen the movie, it's a beautiful, on an emotional level, it's a beautiful father-daughter story. And on a technical level, it does get the physics right. There's some speculative elements, but it's done well.
Okay, so I think that brings us to the end of...
Can I make one additional thing? Incidentally, I am on Facebook, so if any of you want to contact me as a Facebook
So
friend,
good pitching, Ron.
please feel free. And my Facebook page, I should mention, is not the usual one. It's not like how my Aunt Mary's copper pie was. It's actually devoted towards scientific topics. But so if you wish to contact me, I'd be happy to add you as Facebook friends.
And I believe that we have access. I want to double check the Fox Amphitheater. Is that?
Yes, it's clear.
It's clear. You actually want to continue this discussion. We can all go to the Fox Amphitheater right now. We're more than happy to have answered more questions of your audience. It's right around the corner.
I would ask you to please make your exit from this theater so we can set up for the next screening, and I'll show you where the Fox Theater is.
Can I get up to you? Thank you very much, and thanks to Gisella and Ron for making this happen. Thank you.
Can I ask?